Today we're revisiting the Malleus Maleficarum, a notorious 1486 witch-hunting manual authored by two Dominican inquisitors, primarily Heinrich Kramer and, at least nominally, Jakob Sprenger. Officially backed by Pope Innocent VIII's 1484 bull, Summis desiderantes, the Malleus is a three-part work. The first two parts are more demonological in nature, while the third part serves more as a practical guide to prosecution, quite similar to Nicholas Eymeric's Directorium Inquisitorum. The Malleus became the most notorious of a number of so-called continental reference works on witchcraft, and it was widely read, printed, and circulated by both Catholics and Protestants during the great European witch hunts of the 15th to 17th centuries. It's not the largest demonological work, it's not the most original, it's not even the most widely accepted. There were plenty of people within the Catholic Church who thought Kramer was a lunatic. But the Malleus is the most infamous, followed by King James's Demonology, probably on account of its complex and lurid science of incubi and succubi, and all the elaborate sorts of swapping they get up to. Now, in part 2 of the Malleus, there are a number of sensational little stories about witches and their dastardly deeds, from diabolic pacts and furtive relations with demons, to night flights, sabbaths, and shape-shifting spells. These were largely intended to be used in sermons. The Dominicans, after all, are the order of preachers, the Ordo Praedicatorum, and their role as confessors and inquisitors is ultimately downhill from this original purpose, preaching as a means to wage war on heresy. What I'd like to do today is take the opportunity to read you this classic passage from Chapter 7 entitled, How, as it were, Witches Deprive Man of His Virile Member. In this unusual chapter, that is generally unusual, not unusual within the context of the Malleus, Kramer discusses the supposed ability of witches to essentially unman a man, that is, to make his manhood vanish. The text cites first-hand anecdotes of men who believed they lost their members due to witchcraft, something that I guess was not uncommon in 15th century Germany, and more infamously, it tells the tale of witches magically gathering up multiple male organs into collections of sorts. The most widely cited of these stories involves one witch who got her hands on some 20 to 30 members and put them in a bird's nest, where they became like birds eating oats and corn. Now, this kind of lewd and absurd imagery has made this chapter one of the most ridiculed examples of medieval witch lore. But beyond the shock value, this chapter can still give us plenty of insight into the medieval mind regarding witchcraft and illusion. Kramer was ultimately trying to reconcile bizarre folk reports with works like Augustine's City of God, or the Canon Episcopi that argued that the night rides some women claimed to make with Diana or Herodias were just demonic deceptions. He ultimately argued that witches do not literally mutilate male bodies, but rather that the great Satan, the grandest of deceivers, creates illusions that trick men into thinking their junk has been stolen. According to the text, these deceptions are only permitted by God, like in the book of Job, to afflict those mired in sin, especially lust, while the devout are immune, so it's not exactly like the book of Job. This explanation blends scholastic reasoning and popular superstition to explain how demons trick the senses, but at the same time it's trying to drive home a moral lesson. Impotence by witchcraft is basically the sinner's fault. It's a kind of spiritual punishment from on high against those, as we say, given over to a reprobate mind. By attacking male virility, the alleged witches here are really just doing the devil's dirty work, like avenging angels. So, in the spirit of the season, let's now turn to the chapter in full, using Montague Summers's English translation from 1928. Summers was a pretty weird dude, to say the least, and I really don't endorse some of his personal life choices, which you can look up on your own, but he was the first to fully translate the Malleus Maleficarum into English. His edition, which has long been in the public domain, tends to preserve the archaic tone of the original Latin, so if you're looking for something a bit less old-fashioned, I recommend Christopher McKay's more recent 2009 scholarly translation, which I can't read here because it's not in the public domain. So, here we go. How, as it were, witches deprive man of his virile member. We have already shown that witches can take away the male organ, not indeed by actually despoiling the human body of it, but in the manner which we have already declared. And of this, we shall instance a few examples. In the town of Ratisbon, a certain young man who had an intrigue with a girl, wishing to leave her, lost his member. That is to say, some glamour was cast over it, so that he could see or touch nothing but his smooth body. In his worry over this, he went to a tavern to drink wine, and after he had sat there for a while, he got into conversation with another woman who was there, and told her the cause of his sadness, explaining everything and demonstrating in his body that it was so. The woman was astute, and asked whether he suspected anyone, and when he named such a one, unfolding the whole matter, she said, "If persuasion is not enough, you must use some violence to induce her to restore to you your health." So, in the evening, the young man watched the way by which the witch was in the habit of going, and finding her, prayed her to restore to him the health of his body. And when she maintained that she was innocent and knew nothing about it, he fell upon her, and winding a towel tightly around her neck, choked her, saying, "Unless you give me back my health, you shall die at my hands." Then she, being unable to cry out, and growing black, said, "Let me go, and I will heal you." The young man then relaxed the pressure of the towel, and the witch touched him with her hand between the thighs, saying, "Now you have what you desire." And the young man, as he afterward said, plainly felt, before he had verified it by looking or touching, that his member had been restored to him by the mere touch of the witch. A similar experience is narrated by a certain venerable father of the Dominican house of Spires, well known in the order for the honesty of his life and for his learning. One day, he says, while I was hearing confessions, a young man came to me, and in the course of his confessions, woefully said that he had lost his member. Being astonished at this, and not being willing to give it easy credence, since, in the opinion of the wise, it is a mark of light-heartedness to believe too easily, I obtained proof of it when I saw nothing on the young man's removing his clothes and showing the place. Then, using the wisest counsel I could, I asked whether he suspected anyone of having so bewitched him, and the young man said that he did suspect someone, but that she was absent and living in Worms. Then I said, I advise you to go to her as soon as possible and try your utmost to soften her with gentle words and promises. And he did so, for he came back after a few days and thanked me, saying that he was whole and had recovered everything. And I believed his words, but again proved them by the evidence of my eyes. But there are some points to be noted for the clearer understanding of what has already been written concerning this matter. First, it must in no way be believed that such members are really torn right away from the body, but that they are hidden by the devil through some prestidigitory art, so that they can neither be seen nor felt. And this is proved by the authorities and by argument, although it has been treated of before, where Alexander of Hales said that a prestige, properly understood, is an illusion of the devil, which is not caused by any material change, but exists only in the perception of him who is deluded, either in his interior or exterior senses. With reference to these words, It is to be noted that, in the case we are considering, two of the exterior senses, namely those of sight and touch, are deluded, and not the interior senses, namely the common sense, fancy, imagination, thought, and memory. But St. Thomas says there are only four, as has been told before, reckoning fancy and imagination as one, and with some reason, for there is little difference between imagining and fancying. And these senses, and not only the exterior senses, are affected when it is not a case of hiding something, but the causing something to appear to a man either when he is awake or asleep. As when a man who is awake sees things otherwise than as they are, such as seeing someone devour a horse with its rider, or thinking he sees a man transformed into a beast, or thinking that he himself is a beast and must associate with beasts. For then the exterior senses are deluded and are employed by the interior senses. For by the power of devils, with God's permission, mental images long retrained in the treasury of such images, which is the memory, are drawn out, not from the intellectual understanding in which such images are stored, but from the memory, which is the repository of mental images, and is situated at the back of the head, and are presented to the imaginative faculty. And so strongly are they impressed on that faculty that a man has an inevitable impulse to imagine a horse or a beast when the devil draws from the memory an image of a horse or a beast. And so he is compelled to think that he sees with his external eyes such a beast, when there actually is no such beast to see. But it seems to be so by reason of the impulsive force of the devil working by means of those images. And it need not seem wonderful that devils can do this, when even a natural defect is able to effect the same result, as is shown in the case of frantic and melancholy men, as in maniacs and some drunkards, who are unable to discern truly. For frantic men think that they see marvelous things, such as beasts and other horrors, when they, in actual fact, see nothing. And finally, the reason is self-evident. Since the devil has power over inferior things, except only the soul, he is therefore able to effect certain changes in those things, when God allows, so that things appear to be otherwise than they are. And this he does, as I have said, either by confusing and diluting the organ of sight, so that a clear thing appears cloudy, just as after weeping, owing to the collected humors, the light appears to differ from what it was before, or by operating on the imaginative faculty by a transmutation of mental images, or by some agitation of various humors, so that matters which are earthy and dry seem to be fire or water, as some people make everyone in the house strip themselves naked under the impression that they are swimming in water. It may be asked further with reference to the above method of devils, whether this sort of illusion can happen indifferently to the good and to the wicked, just as other bodily infirmities can be brought by witches even upon those who are in a state of grace. To this question, following the words of Cassian in his second collation of the abbot Cyrenus, we must answer that they cannot. And from this, it follows that all who are deluded in this way are presumed to be in deadly sin. For he says, as is clear from the words of St. Anthony, the devil can in no way enter the mind or body of any man, nor has the power to penetrate into the thoughts of anybody, unless such a person has first become destitute of all holy thoughts, and is quite bereft and denuded of spiritual contemplation. This agrees with Boethius, where he says in the Consolation of Philosophy, "We had given you such arms that, if you had not thrown them away, you would have been preserved from infirmity." Also, Cassian tells us in the same place of two pagan witches, each in his own way malicious, who by their witchcraft sent a succession of devils into the cell of St. Anthony for the purpose of driving him from there by their temptations, being infected with hatred for the holy man because a great number of people visited him every day. And though these devils assailed him with the keenest of spurs to his thoughts, yet he drove them away by crossing himself on the forehead and breast, and by prostrating himself in earnest prayer. Therefore, we may say that all who are so deluded by devils, not reckoning any other bodily infirmities, are lacking in the gift of divine grace. And so it is said in Tobias 6, the devil has power against those who are subject to their lusts. We may summarize our conclusions as follows. Devils can, for their profit and probation, injure the good in their fortunes, that is, in such exterior things as riches, fame, and bodily health. This is clear from the case of blessed Job, who was afflicted by the devil in such matters. But such injuries are not of their own causing, so that they cannot be led or driven into any sin, although they can be tempted both inwardly and outwardly in the flesh. But the devils cannot afflict the good with this sort of illusion, either actively or passively. Not actively, by deluding their senses as they do of others who are not in the state of grace, and not passively, by taking away their male organs by some glamour. For in these two respects, they could never injure Job, especially in regard to the venereal act, for he was of such continence that he was able to say, I have vowed a vow with my eyes that I shall never think about a virgin, and still less about another man's wife. Nevertheless, the devil knows that he has great power over sinners. When a strong man keepeth his palace armed, his goods are in peace. And what then is to be thought of those witches who in this way sometimes collect male organs in great numbers, as many as 20 or 30 members together, and put them in a bird's nest, or shut them up in a box, where they move themselves like living members, and eat oats and corn, as has been seen by many, and is a matter of common report? It is to be said that it is all done by the devil's work and illusion, for the senses of those who see them are deluded in the way we've said. For a certain man tells that, when he had lost his member, he approached a known witch to ask her to restore it to him. She told the afflicted man to climb a certain tree, and that he might take whichever he liked out of the nest in which there were several members. And when he tried to take a big one, the witch said, You must not take that one, for it belongs to a parish priest. All these things are caused by devils through an illusion or glamour, in the way we have said, by confusing the organ of vision, by transmuting the mental images in the imaginative faculty. And it must not be said that these members which are shown are devils in assumed members, just as they sometimes appear to witches and men in assumed aerial bodies, and converse with them. And the reason is that they effect this thing by an easier method, namely, by drawing out an inner mental image from the repository of the memory, and impressing it on the imagination. It is to be said that, if the devil had no other purpose than merely to show himself in human form, then there would be no need for him to appear in an assumed body, since he could effect his purpose well enough by the aforesaid illusion. But this is not so, for he has another purpose, namely to speak and eat with them, and to commit other abominations. Therefore, it is necessary that he should himself be present, placing himself actually in sight in an assumed body. For as St. Thomas says, where the angel's power is, there he operates. And it may be asked, if the devil by himself, and without any witch, takes away anyone's virile member, whether there is any difference between one sort of deprivation and the other. In addition to what has been said in the first part of this work on the question whether witches can take away a member, the devil does actually take it away, and it is actually restored when it has to be restored. Secondly, as it is not taken away without injury, so it is not without pain. Thirdly, he never does this unless compelled by a good angel, for by so doing he cuts off a great source of profit to him, for he knows that he can work more witchcraft on that act than on any other human acts, for God permits him to do more injury to that than to other human acts. But none of the above points apply when he works through the agency of a witch, with God's permission. And if it is asked whether the devil is more apt to injure men or creatures by himself than through a witch, it can be said that there is no comparison between the two cases, for he is infinitely more apt to do harm through the agency of witches. First, because he thus gives greater offense to God by usurping to himself a creature dedicated to him. Secondly, because when God is the more offended, he allows him the more power of injuring men. And thirdly, for his own gains, which he places in the perdition of souls. If you would like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist. And above all, thank you for listening.